Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. So, guys, I want to do a Forgotten Team series on the New York Knicks from 1991 to 1993. I want to mention some of these teams from the early 90s into the late 90s era of NBA, because I feel like lately a lot of the 90s era players and teams, they've been getting a lot of hate lately. People saying lies. And just, talking about the era in general, saying it wasn't good and, things like that. And we know why they're doing this. They're trying to downplay Michael Jordan's era as a whole to try to make it seem as if Michael Jordan dominated lesser competition or these guys weren't that good, and things like that. So when we talk about the New York Knicks, guys, of the early 90s, that might have been, after the Detroit Pistons, the Bulls' biggest challenge in the Eastern Conference. Right after the Bulls had gone past the Pistons in 1991, and they went on to win 3 straight titles in the early 90s, the New York Knicks of the Eastern Conference emerged as the next team after the Pistons. They emerged as the Bulls' biggest threat, their biggest rival of the 90s. And when we think about the 1991 New York Knicks, and you think about, the players that they had on their team, I believe the 91 Knicks only won 37 games. I believe they were coached by Stu Jackson. And, of course, you had Patrick Ewing there. But you also had solid veterans like Kiki Vandeweghe, Kenny Skywalker, Gerald Wilkins, Charles Oakley was there, Mark Jackson. I believe they had Maurice Cheeks on that team, another solid point guard, defensive player. These guys that I mentioned, Kiki Vandeweghe. Kiki Vandeweghe in his prime give you 20 points a game, man. Really solid outside shooter, man. Great perimeter shooter, man. Just a great guy to have on your team, man. Knock down the open shot. Gerald Wilkins, like I talked about, very scrappy, hard-nosed defensive player, a hustle guy, a guy with grit. You all know Gerald Wilkins, Dominique Wilkins' younger brother. And, when you think about guys like a Mark Jackson on that New York Knicks team, man, Mark Jackson, a very underrated point guard in NBA history, could give you anywhere between 12 and 15 points, 10 to 12 assists a game. He's actually the last Rookie of the Year award winner for the New York Knicks, Mark Jackson, man, if you believe it or not, guys. Obviously, like I said, you have Patrick Ewing there, who is a superstar, one of the great defensive centers of all time, and a very tough-nosed and gritty player. And then you had a guy like a Charles Oakley there, another gritty, defensive-minded guy, great rebounder at that position, man. Just a hard-nosed player, an enforcer, right? Charles Oakley. So, in 1991, the New York Knicks would make the playoffs, and they were the 8th seed, like I said, and they would face the Bulls in the first round. And the Bulls, I can't remember how many games they won, 62 games, I want to say, or something like that. They were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, man, and everybody was, hyped up on the Bulls, and the Knicks got swept right out of there, right? They beat the Knicks 3 games to nothing, right? And that was a learning experience for the New York Knicks at that time. And a lot of you guys probably remember that dunk that Michael Jordan had on Patrick Ewing when he, they tried to trap him on the baseline, and he faked left, and then he went right around Oakley, and then he rose up and dunked on Ewing. That was in the 91 playoffs. So the following season, the New York Knicks would make a huge change, guys. They would bring in Pat Riley, the legendary coach from the Los Angeles Lakers from the Showtime era. They would bring in Pat Riley, the coach of the Knicks, man. And that would prove to be a huge difference maker for the New York Knicks franchise in that early 90s, man. The New York Knicks would go from 37 wins in 1991 to, I believe, 51 wins in 1992, by also bringing in guys like an Anthony Mason, an Xavier McDaniel. I believe they brought in, I think Doc Rivers might have been on that team. I'm not sure, guys, but they brought in Anthony Mason and Xavier McDaniel, these defensive-minded players. And the team, like I said, they improved right away. A lot of wins. You're talking about 14-win difference between 91 and 92 with the addition of Pat Riley and some of those players I mentioned. They still had Charles Oakley there. You still had Patrick Ewing, the anchor there. You still had John Starks. And you still had Gerald Wilkins there. So you had a very good defensive unit when you think about those players that I mentioned, man. And in 1992, the Knicks would make the playoffs again. I believe they would be the four seed that season. And they would face the Detroit Pistons in the first round. And they would beat the Detroit Pistons 3-2 in a tough 5-game series, man. I think the Detroit Pistons were the 5 seed at the time. And I believe that was the first time the New York Knicks had beat the Detroit Pistons in the playoffs in a while. You know, since the Bad Boy Pistons and all that stuff. And this would pretty much be the end of the Bad Boy Pistons as we knew them, the 1992 season. So the Knicks would go on to beat the Pistons, like I said, in a tough 5-game series. And they would face the Chicago Bulls in the second round. The number 1 seed Chicago Bulls. The defending champion Chicago Bulls. And in that series, the Knicks would win game 1. And, you know, going into that series, guys, a lot of people were picking the Chicago Bulls to sweep the Knicks, to sweep them. And like I said, the Knicks would win game 1 in Chicago. The Bulls would go on to win games 2 and games 3. I believe the Knicks won game 4, which set up a game 5 series tied 2-2. And the Bulls would win game 5. The Knicks would go on and win game 6, which would set up a game 7. And the Chicago Bulls would go on to win game 7 against the New York Knicks. But it was the Knicks forcing the Bulls into a game 7. It was the first game 7 the Bulls would have to play since they won the championship. Their first game 7 since, I believe, the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals. So, you know, guys, when you think about the New York Knicks making the rise, going from first round exit, being swept 3-0 to challenging the Bulls in a 7-game series, pushing them to the limit and playing tough. You know, guys, when you go back and you watch a lot of those Knicks teams of the early 90s, like I mentioned, and you think about some of the players that they had, the New York Knicks, what Pat Riley did when he came in, guys, is he basically made the New York Knicks the New York Pistons. He made them into a Detroit Pistons type team where he focused on hard-nosed defense, right? Physical play, right? Knocking guys down, not giving any easy layups and dunks and things like that. And they would try to keep the scores low and grind out wins. And that's what worked for the New York Knicks, man. He had the personnel to do that, Pat Riley. And when you're anchored by someone like a Patrick Ewing, when you think about the Detroit Pistons, guys, and you think about their team defense, and you think about the defensive players that they had, guys like Joe Dumars, guys like Dennis Rodman, you know, and you think about the big men they had. They didn't have any big men like a Patrick Ewing. They didn't have a shot blocker like a Patrick Ewing. The only guy you could consider a shot blocker would be maybe like a John Sally, but he was not on the level of a Patrick Ewing. So when you think about the Knicks, what they would do is they would funnel, you know, Jordan to the help like a Patrick Ewing, to a Charles Oakley, to an Anthony Mason, you know? So you had these physical, tough-nosed defensive guys like a Gerald Wilkins, like a John Starks, you know, like a Charles Oakley, like an Anthony Mason. These guys were tough-nosed, minded, Xavier McDaniels. You know, and that's how they played basketball, guys. And I remember Phil Jackson and Pat Riley going back and forth in the newspapers during those couple of years that the Knicks and the Bulls played each other in the playoffs. And, you know, Phil Jackson complaining about the play of the Knicks and saying it was football and, you know, they were fouling everybody and this and that. And they were making the game ugly. And then Pat Riley going back at Phil Jackson and telling him to stop crying. And what is this? This is not ballet. I thought we were playing basketball out here. So it was a heated rivalry coming between the coaches and the players. I know you guys remember in the 1992 second round that I was just talking about, in Game 7, Xavier McDaniel and Michael Jordan being nose to nose, right? And Michael Jordan's basically saying, F you, man, F you. Michael Jordan and Xavier McDaniel and some of these other players, it was a heated rivalry, guys, and it was brewing. This was the second year in a row that they were playing each other, and I believe this was the third time in 4 years that the Knicks and the Bulls had faced off in the playoffs. I believe they faced off in 1989 in the second round. They didn't play each other in 1990, but 1990, when I told you, they played each other in the first round. Now in 1992, they're in a tough 7-game series, man. The Knicks are coming. The Knicks were tough, man. And now you fast forward to 1993, guys, and this was building, right? For the past couple of seasons, this was building the rivalry, right? And now the Knicks had turned the tables on the Bulls, right? In 1992-1993 season, the New York Knicks won, I believe, 60 games. They were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, guys, over the Bulls. I believe the Bulls won 58 games that season. I can't remember how many games they won in 1993. But the New York Knicks had a better record than the Chicago Bulls that season. And I believe that season, the New York Knicks had won like some crazy I don't know if it was an NBA record at the time, but they had won like 30 straight home games or some crazy amount of home games at Madison Square Garden. I remember watching that game. And the announcers talking about how many consecutive home games the Knicks had won. They were almost impossible to beat at home that season. Like I said, guys, I think it was like 30 consecutive games, I think dating back to like the regular season previously. So when we talk about the New York Knicks in 1993 having the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference above the two-time defending champion Chicago Bulls, and then we think about the playoffs, guys. So the New York Knicks and Chicago Bulls would meet each other in the Eastern Conference Finals that season. So like I mentioned, you see the build-up, right, guys? 1991, first-round sweep. 1992, second round, 7-game series, right? A lot of heated stuff, a lot of trash talking, right? A lot of, like I said, rivalries. You see that stuff going on. Now in 1993, they meet in the Eastern Conference Finals. So they literally went and the Knicks, they went from one round to the second round. Now they're in the Eastern Conference Finals due to someone like a Pat Riley. And in the 1993 season, they got rid of Xavier McDaniel, which I thought as a Knicks fan was a mistake. I liked Xavier McDaniel's personality. I liked his demeanor. I liked the way he carried himself on the court. Like I said, man, I just liked his grit, man. And they brought in Charles Smith. And all my New York fans, we all know, and when you think of Charles Smith or you hear Charles Smith's name, you immediately think about him missing those like 5 layups under the rim. And I believe that was game 5 of that series, right? Charles Smith going for a layup, getting blocked, going for a layup, getting blocked, going for a layup, getting blocked, right? And then the Bulls getting the possession at the end of that. And that's what Charles Smith is known for in New York Knicks history, guys. But they brought in Charles Smith. Xavier McDaniels was gone. Guys like Mark Jackson was gone. They brought in Gerald Wilkins was gone. They brought in Rolando Blackman. They brought in Charles Smith, like I said. And the New York Knicks had a very tough lineup, man. They had a very tough lineup. Like I said, you had Patrick Ewing still there, right? The defensive anchor. You had Charles Oakley there, the enforcer. Anthony Mason, another enforcer. You had John Starks, who was just one of the grittiest, one of the best defensive players against Michael Jordan, man. A lot of people, they try to knock someone like a John Starks because he's not a Hall of Famer or he's not a big-name guy. But John Starks was one of the best defensive players at that position at that time in the NBA, man. Because guys like John Starks, guys like Gerald Wilkins that I mentioned previously, these guys would watch film on Michael Jordan, literally watch film and study Michael Jordan's moves to learn his tendencies, learn his favorite spots on the floor. They would do this routinely, guys. And that's what made them so tough. They didn't take Michael Jordan lightly. They understood and appreciated his greatness. So they did everything they could, right? They focused on the details to play tough defense against Michael Jordan. Like I said, the way guys like John Starks would guard Michael Jordan is they would try to funnel him in to the help, funnel him into Patrick Ewing, funnel him in to Charles Oakley, into Anthony Mason, where they would clobber guys like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Anytime you came in the lane, they would let you know about it. And in that series, man, the Knicks won the first 2 games against the Bulls at home. Like I told you, the Knicks had not lost a home game. And I don't know how many consecutive games the Knicks, right? They were just on some kind of crazy domination at Madison Square Garden. It was ridiculous. So they would go on to win those first 2 games against the Bulls handedly. I mean, and they made the Bulls look bad. This was not lucky wins. They were out hustling the Bulls. They were out muscling the Bulls. And believe it or not, they were actually out coaching Phil Jackson's Chicago Bulls. Pat Riley was out coaching Phil Jackson during those first 2 games. Like I said, and when you think about the talent level that the New York Knicks had from top to bottom, they had some really good players when you compare it to the talent from top to bottom on the Chicago Bulls. So this was a really capable team. They didn't win those games by accident. And I remember during that season, or during that series, Michael Jordan taking a lot of heat in the press, in the New York papers, because he was seen in Atlantic City gambling till, all kinds of hours in the morning. And people were blaming that on the reason why the Bulls had lost those first 2 games because of Michael Jordan being out late in Atlantic City. And it was a huge, big deal for Michael Jordan. He was taking a lot of heat for that, guys. A lot of heat he had to deal with during that series. But I remember Michael Jordan also in the post-game press conference after they went down 0-2, and they asked him about being down 0-2. And I believe that was the first time the Bulls had lost the first 2 games of a series since they had won the title. And Michael Jordan said, we just have to go back to Chicago. We got to get some home cooking. Get back to our home court and get some home cooking. That's literally what he said, word for word, get some home cooking. And I called the home cooking press conference. And we all know what would happen. Michael Jordan and the Bulls would crank it up. They would go on to win the next 4 games in a row. They would actually beat New York in Madison Square Garden. They would actually do that and go on to win the series in 6 games, 4 games to 2. And the Knicks, it was a tough series, man. The Knicks didn't get beat down, because when you think about the New York Knicks teams, guys, like I said, of the early 90s, and you think about the way they guarded Michael Jordan, when you look at Michael Jordan's numbers in a lot of those series, 91, 92, 93, and you look at his field goal percentages for those games, and you look at his teammates' field goal percentages for those games, the New York Knicks were very good defensively against Michael Jordan. Now, yes, Michael Jordan is known to dominate the New York Knicks during his career. Absolutely. Overall, that's true. But when you look at some of these series that the New York Knicks played against Michael Jordan, or Michael Jordan played against the New York Knicks, the New York Knicks had very capable defenders, like I mentioned. John Starks, Gerald Wilkins, Rolando Blackman, Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, Anthony Masons, Doc Rivers, Maurice Cheeks. They had these guys on these teams, capable guys. And they would force Michael Jordan into difficult shots. They would contest all of his shots. And like I said, when you look at his shooting percentages, and you look at his numbers in some of those series against the Knicks, you could see why I say that the New York Knicks, to me, they might have been the best defensive team against Michael Jordan. That's including the Bad Boys Pistons. Now, for me, when I think about the New York Knicks and their defense, like I said, because they had someone like a Patrick Ewing back there, it allowed guys like Gerald Wilkins and John Starks to sometimes, like I said, overplay Michael Jordan to a certain degree and force him into the help. And like I mentioned previously, guys like John Starks and Gerald Wilkins would routinely study film on Michael Jordan. I mean, study film, guys, on this man to learn his tendencies. When you go back and you watch those first 2 games in 1993 Eastern Conference Finals, and you watch John Starks, he's just guessing on Michael Jordan, and he's guessing right a lot of the time because he had studied him. And Michael Jordan had to make adjustments. And like I said, when you're dealing with guys like that are hustling, I've told you in the past, guys, Michael Jordan brought out the best in his opponents, right? The Chicago Bulls got the team's best punch, right? Most of the time because they were the defending champions. It was really something cool to watch in the early 90s, man. Like I said, to me, in the early 90s, the Knicks were the next team to give the Bulls problems after the Detroit Pistons. And during that early 90s title run, to me, the New York Knicks were the Bulls' toughest competition. When you think about the Eastern Conference Finals, guys, in 1993, in that tough series against the Knicks, same thing in 1992 when they went 7 games. Those are the kind of series that would set the Bulls up for success in the finals, to push through teams like that, right? The road to the finals for the Chicago Bulls was very difficult going through teams like the New York Knicks. That when they finally got to the NBA Finals and they had to face a physical team like the Knicks earlier on, the finals wasn't as bad for them. Not to say it wasn't a challenge, but the New York Knicks gave the Bulls a great test before they would go on and win the championships those years. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of long. I wanted to cover the 1991 to 1993 Knicks and their rise to become the Bulls' greatest rival in that early series. And if you guys remember, in 1994, that same New York Knicks team would go on to the NBA Finals and lose in 7 games to the Houston Rockets. But you see the ascension, right, guys? 1991 first round, 1992 second round, 1993 Eastern Conference Finals, and in 1994, they would get to the NBA Finals. Now, I know Michael Jordan was retired at that time, guys. They did beat the Bulls without Michael Jordan. I get that. You could put an asterisk on that. However, you still see the rise of the New York Knicks in the early 90s, man, making it to the NBA Finals, which I believe they should have won. So, like I said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Forgotten teams. The New York Knicks, man, of 1991 to 1993 are a forgotten team because they didn't win the championship. But to me, like I said, they were the Bulls' biggest rivalry in the Eastern Conference in that early three-peat.